Okay, should we establish quorum?
Chair Beck,
Present.
Commissioner Dopian,
Present.
Commissioner Liu,
Present.
Commissioner Texler here, Commissioner Whedon.
Present.
Okay, let the record show that Commissioner or Vice Chair Ryan and Commissioner Van Rees are not here, but we have a quorum.
Excellent. I think the next step is to request public comments for items not on the agenda. And I have one. From. Is that also one? That's on that. One from Gary. About. Trees and strong neighborhoods.
Good evening, happy new year. Part of the reason I'm here is to say hi. As you know, I'm still planting trees with Greentown Los Altos. We're up to 427, we need another 100. And I have great hopes of making some progress this year, and if you want a tree, or if you know somebody who wants one, please let me know. And you can also reach Greentown Los Altos at greentownlosaltos.org and sign up there for a visit. The other thing is strong neighborhoods. Last December, I was asked to wrap up my fantastic year as Los Altos of the Year, and so I did that with Los Altos Community Coalition. One of the things I brought up at that time was strong neighborhoods are important. As you walk around and you look at the houses, and they're nice houses, but it's really nice to know who lives in those houses. And so meeting your neighbors is important. There are some neighborhoods that are pretty good at this. They have block parties. They get together and put holiday lights up. They have 4th of July parties. And what I would like to do is recognize the neighbors who have been doing that. Have an event maybe in the summer, early fall, where everybody can get together, share some stories. I'm not trying to create new groups like this, but maybe that others people would be inspired hearing what other people have done and why it's so bad. This actually resonated with our mayor. He has a priority of making Los Altos more resilient, more prepared for emergencies. And one of the groups that has done a lot in town to organize neighborhoods is the BATS, the block action teams. We have 100 BATS in town. We could have 400 to cover the city. So there's some scope for doing more. My plan is to reach out to the leaders of the BATS and you to find out who are the leaders who might be interested in talking about their strong neighborhoods and why it works. Robert Hyman with the State Street Market has offered the use of their facilities for a big get together at no charge. So I'm very excited about this. There are a number of people who responded to me after seeing the YouTube videos and the presentation. They're interested. So I think it has some potential. Anyway, that's what I'm up to this year. All the best.
Thank you, Gary. I think that is the only comment on it. That's it. The only note I have. Okay. Next item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from the last meeting. Were there any edits or corrections to those minutes? The motion to approve the minutes. I move to approve the minutes. Second.
Second that.
Vice Chair Ryan,
Yes.
Commissioner Whedon,
Yes.
Chair Beck,
Yes.
Commissioner Dopian,
Yes.
Commissioner Liu. Yes. Commissioner Texler. Yeah. Motion passes.
Okay, the next item On the agenda is what we are calling the dark skies ordinance. And as you remember, the last meeting, had been brought up by the city council. Nick had presented to the city council. And the direction was for the environmental commission to look at it. So we formed a subcommittee of one. And I have prepared a presentation to kind of walk you through my initial thoughts and findings on dark skies, again, as we're calling it. And then open it up for some discussion about next steps. And Tanya has a presentation, I hope. Oh, you guys can't see it?
No.
Did we have that screen or that screen?
No, the room is only for planning commission and city council because there has to be someone to operate it from a third party.
And if we tilt it that way, then we won't be on camera.
Yeah,
That'd bother.
no, not necessarily for just the presentation component.
Yeah, it might make sense to just make it easier if we turn it that way. You need help, Tanya?
Okay.
Has wheels.
Yeah.
Is this good?
We good. We're good. Are you guys good? Do you guys mind standing? It's like a 3-hour.
Depends how long.
If it's 7 hours, no way.
Right, more?
Gary has the best part. Okay, so I've titled it, the consideration of a light pollution guidelines or ordinance for the city of Los Altos. And what I'm going to review are exactly what the city council direction was. Talk about where dark sky comes from, some items to consider for Los Altos. What the elements of an ordinance or some guidelines might look like. And then we can talk about potential next steps. So just reviewing what the explicit direction was from the city council back on October 24th. The motion that was voted on and accepted was that the council directed the EC to research and draft the ordinance. It was pretty clear. And also they made the explicit request to potentially include bird safety guidelines as well. As part of that, they suggested we research the neighboring ordinances or other ordinances in the state, do some public outreach, and then recommend a draft ordinance. The only other noteworthy thing from that meeting, I think, were that if you listen to the public statements, I believe there were well over 10, but there were at least 10. They were overwhelmingly positive on both fronts, both on lighting guidelines and bird safe measures, which are somewhat similar, but also distinct. I should also note that I didn't see any negative comments. I think that's right, that there were no negative comments about these specific items. That's the summary of the meeting. So from that, I did some research over the holiday break. And we can move to the next slide, Tanya. So why is it called dark sky? It's probably somewhat self-evident, but I think it's also important to understand where the dark sky terminology or name comes from, because I think we need to maybe distinguish ourselves from some explicit dark sky objectives. We can talk about that. But Dark Sky International was an organization formed in 1988 with the primary objective of protecting the skies so we have better views of the stars and constellations. So hence they have grown and they are driving dark sky, and they'll certify communities and lighting as part of that Dark Sky Initiative. It's a nonprofit, and hence there's a number of lighting ordinances and guidelines that are entitled Dark Sky, even though that city may not be Dark Sky certified. And so next slide, Tanya. And so when I think about it from a community like ours, really the main objective is to limit light pollution. And in our neighborhoods, I don't know if you've had the experience, but many new homes are being built with quite a bit of bright lights. And it does change the nature of your neighborhood. it can, a lot of that light can trespass on your property. And so although the title is dark sky, I think the way I think about it, it's really about limiting light pollution. It's not necessarily to become a dark sky certified community. It is really about limiting light pollution. I have here a picture of, honestly, some of these are not too far off from some of the homes I've seen around Los Altos, some of the newer homes. And given what you can do with lights these days, this is a result, potential result. Next slide. And so some other things to consider, some things to consider as we think about light ordinances or lighting guidelines for Los Altos. I think the first thing is that was kind of striking to me as somebody, honestly, I had not been familiar with dark skies or lighting ordinances, anything about it. It was new to me that Los Altos has 0 lighting guidelines or regulations right now. And Nick, you keep me honest about that. Obviously, there's Title 24 efficiency requirements that are state driven, but from a lighting perspective, there are no guidelines or regulations. And that is a bit unusual when you look at some of our neighboring cities. They are at least, they may not be ordinances, and I'm not quite sure of the difference between ordinances and guidelines, but most cities do have lighting guidelines. Los Altos does not. The other thing to consider is LED technology. It's not new. It was developed invented in 1962, but it is obviously proliferating now. It's required. You can do a lot of things with LEDs that you cannot do with our old style lights. They're more efficient. You can drive much brighter lights. It's much cheaper to do that. You used to have to be basically a movie house before you could do some of the things you can do on your house at a very reasonable rate with LEDs. And those LEDs have higher light trespass and they can make light pollution worse. It's kind of obvious. They also have a much higher impact, not only on wildlife, but also on, it's proven that they have impacts on human health. Some other things to consider, the housing plan, as we are increasing the density of Los Altos, there are going to be bigger developments that will drive potential lighting issues, light trespass, not only to neighboring, but into the larger properties, but into the larger community. And I think some other things to think about are ADUs now, and I've seen this in our neighborhood, can be built in setbacks that traditionally were off limits. And they can have lighting right up against the fence line, right into a neighboring yard. And so again, I think that's something we need to consider as we evaluate what we do next. And then the final point is, I didn't spend as much time on bird safety, but there are no bird safety guidelines in Los Altos either. That's not too unusual, but many of our neighbors are developing bird safe or do have bird safe guidelines. So I think as I said, I think with any ordinance related to it, you are really trying to limit light pollution. It's pretty simple. You're trying to ensure the limited trespass of lights. And that includes city lights, residential lights, commercial light, or mixed development lights. It's got to cover each of those components. I think one of the main reasons you do it in Los Altos is to maintain the rural feel of the city, the current feel of the city. If we don't, I think that feel could change pretty quickly and dramatically. One of the other obvious objectives is it is known that the blue light from LEDs can impact the circadian rhythm. It can decrease melatonin production, and it does impact sleep, and sleep is very important. Especially if you have a light in your backyard from your neighbors. It also impacts wildlife. It's known it impacts birds, it impacts insects. It probably has impacts on other animals and mammals in the area. And so by reducing light pollution, you are helping that. It reduces energy consumption. I think there are estimates that roughly 30% of lighting is wasted And so by implementing some of these fairly straightforward rules, you could save a fair amount of energy. And finally, you will improve visibility of the night sky, even if that is not your main objective. The guidelines, again, that you could consider putting in place, pretty simple. They're fairly common sense. You have downward focus lights, shielded fixtures. You cap the brightness, the lumens of the light, which is measurable. You require warmer colors. And I think the common one is 2700 Kelvin. And you cap the lumens, or you can cap the lumens per square feet for any property. You require a light curfew. The ones I've seen in place are between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. That's a common one. And all lights should be motion sensor operated after that. You limit flashing, rotating, or blinking lights, which is a fairly obvious one. And two kind of other items. For existing lights, you would have a compliance period. You would encourage people to change out the simple lights, and you would have a 5 or 10-year roll-in period for existing lights to upgrade them to dark sky compliant lighting. What I've seen in some of the neighboring communities is 5-year for residential, 10-year for commercial, up to 15-year for city, with the issue being some city lights are decorative and expensive to change out, and very difficult to make comply with some of the dark sky requirements. Brisbane faced that, and that's their biggest budget item, is some existing 8-form lights that will cost over $1 million to change out over the next 10 years. I don't think we have that, but we have not done a light inventory in Los Altos yet. Of course, as you consider all these potential guidelines, there are exceptions, including for safety, obviously. And I think there would always be outs if somebody were to appeal and make a justification for non-compliant lights, if it made sense. Next slide. Again, I just included this. This is a handout, I believe, that Brisbane and Portola Valley handout with as part of their guidelines and ordinance. Although it may seem kind of complicated, some of the guidelines we just went over, actually the lighting options are pretty straightforward. Basically, you want a shielded down focus light. It's pretty simple. Again, this is just an example of if we did introduce an ordinance, making it clear, I think, to the community is not that hard what their options are and what we're going to see. Next. Just quickly, what some of the other communities on the peninsula are working on or are doing. And I'm not 100% sure this is accurate, but I believe it's 80 to 90% accurate. Brisbane has done a first reading of the dark sky and intend to pass that in the new year. It's a pretty robust dark sky policy. It's taken 3 years to implement, but they've done a lot of the heavy lifting. I think for most of us, there was no model ordinance when they started. There is a model ordinance now that actually is pretty close to what they put in place. They originally were going for dark sky international certification. They decided to back off that, but they've done a lot of the heavy lifting and are about to or should be voting that in the new year. Los Altos Hills has lighting guidelines. Palo Alto is considering a dark sky type ordinance. Sunnyvale is considering and does have bird safe guidelines that include a lighting element, I believe. So they require buildings to have lights turned off at 10 or 11 and internal sensors so the birds are not attracted to those lights at night. Saratoga is considering, they do have some lighting guidelines. Los Gatos is considering a dark sky ordinance and already has lighting guidelines. And I'm distinguishing again before distinguishing between a robust dark sky ordinance and just basic lighting guidelines, right? Cupertino has a very robust dark sky and bird safe ordinance and policies. Mountain View is considering a lighting ordinance and does have some existing bird safe guidelines. San Jose has some bird safe guidelines, and Portola Valley has a dark sky ordinance. One other point is the state of California. There's been some back and forth on this. Newsom did veto one attempt at some basic lighting guidelines, but I think they've restarted AB 38 and it is in process or on hold. And it is requiring some very basic lighting guidelines, shielded lights effectively. So there is a lot of activity. We are not alone in considering this. And I think it's getting quite a bit of traction. Some of the protests I've seen about a dark sky ordinance are the idea of enforcement. Are we going to hire lighting police to go around at night and enforce the law? I think the easy answer is you wouldn't do that. I don't even think you would hire any additional enforcement. The idea would be that the neighbors would try to solve it themselves where possible. And this is an example of a suggestion from the city of Laguna Beach, who has a lighting policy, and this is on their site how they enforce it or suggest it's enforced. You notify your neighbor, they have 90 days to comply. If not, then you notify the city and the planning department will help you sort it out. From what I've seen, from what I've heard, most issues get solved this way without having any or much city involvement. Next, sorry. Quickly moving on to bird safe protections. In case you're not aware of it, birds can and do collide with buildings and walls if they reflect the sky or look like a sky or the surrounding habitat. And there are very simple, or there are treatments you can do to both windows, facades, balconies that will severely mitigate that or significantly mitigate bird collisions. Basically, there's 5 or 6 components to a bird safe protection ordinance, including the application. Are you going after new builds, existing remodels? Are you treating the facades, or what do you require for the treatment? What height, what reflectivity? What other features are you going to include? For example, there's pathways. People sometimes use glass on balconies, and that's very dangerous for the birds. So those are all things you would want to consider limiting in a bird safe ordinance. Finally, indoor occupancy sensors and timers in order to turn off the building lights after 10 or 11 o'clock at night to mitigate bird collisions in the evening. Next. So just quickly, I wanted to highlight 3 to 5 objections and what the counterpoint to those are as we think about these. The first objection is, well, Los Altos is a small city. The implementation of any of these would have a limited impact. And I think it's very clear to me that if we're trying to maintain the look and feel of Los Altos and limit light pollution in general, it would have a medium impact on our community, regardless of what our neighboring cities do. It would certainly have an immediate health impact on the city, human health, the city bird population, the city wildlife, regardless of what the neighboring cities do. You can have an immediate impact in the city. Again, that's assuming we're not going after true dark sky certification. That's a different issue. The other protest I've heard is that, well, Los Altos really has no tall buildings. It would have a limited wildlife benefit. That's actually not true. Most bird deaths are not tied to high-rise buildings. They're tied to low and medium-rise buildings. The first 2 to 3 floors are where most of the damage is done to birds. I've seen protests about safety. What I've been surprised about learning is that there really is no conclusive evidence that more light reduces crime. There's both sides of that. More light creates more shadows, and causes eyes to not adjust. So that's not necessarily true. And of course, in any ordinance, there will be safety exceptions. There were some protests about, or potential protests about, the enforcement costs. Most of the communities I've spoken to, including Brisbane, don't expect high enforcement costs, although it is early, so it is a risk, but they do not expect high enforcement costs or high costs of review of planning due to the new lighting element. Having said that, as we work through this, we will have to work with staff and understand what the potential risks are and make sure we don't do anything that drives significant costs. Implementation enforcement. Next. So in terms of next steps, I think I'm not sure what the exact thing to do, but perhaps the Environmental Commission takes a vote on whether to further flesh that out. As part of that, I think it would be good to add at least one more person to the subcommittee if we can get a volunteer. It would help with the workload. In addition, we would want to continue to benchmark the neighboring cities. And specifically, I think it's fairly easy to find their guidelines and ordinances. Where I think we need to benchmark is on the enforcement, how that's done and what the costs are of that enforcement. We need to inventory city lighting. One of the things I learned, and so city lighting, I think the city itself has a good feel for what's on its properties, but it has not a good feeling for streetlights. What exists, who owns it, who controls it. It seems like PG&E and the city have a very loose agreement. And as a result, it's a bit, anyway, it's something we should get done, because the cost of upgrading street lighting could be significant. We don't really even know what we have. In addition, we should work with city staff to understand the impacts and costs of all the different work processes. That includes planning, police, fire, and any other organizations we can find. We should benchmark the bird-safe policies in our neighboring communities, conduct public outreach and feedback through surveys, and then draft the guidelines and ordinances. And again, we're lucky that we are not the first to move. There are good existing models already from the Sierra Club and the Audubon Society and the neighboring cities. And that is it. I think the first is public comment. Is that right?
Yes.
Or do we have clarifying questions first? We should have questions. Any questions from the commissioners? All right.
You can do it either way.
Either way, I was gonna suggest Jason for the comments. Only one try.
Okay, let's do public comments on the dark skies. I think, yeah, I just
I
think,
went first place, okay. I know this is gonna be some more. So, hi, Commission, I'm Ann Heppenstall. I'm a longtime resident of Los Altos and someone who cares about birds and nature. I am so excited to see the council take this up and now the Environmental Commission take this up, to see the excellent research that it went into the report tonight and the many good points that you raised. So it's wonderful to see. I want the city of Los Altos to implement bird safe design requirements as well as light pollution policies. As you spoke to in the report, lights at night have a negative impact on our community. Light pollution reduces our ability to see the night sky and enjoy the stars. That's one of the beautiful things of living in Los Altos. When you walk around the block, you can still see the stars, right? Artificial light at nighttime negatively impacts birds, insects, and mammals, including humans. I'm very sensitive to the light and I know it impacts my sleep. The light pollution interferes with birds' night migration, which is seasonal, which helps, right? Helps with what you're thinking about, and disrupts human sleep quality, which is not seasonal, unfortunately. A light pollution policy would make Los Altos a better place to live, preserve its character, as you spoke to in your report, reduce energy consumption, and support a healthier environment for people and animals. I also want Los Altos to take up a bird safe design policy for new construction and to take action to improve bird safety of existing buildings, particularly governmental and commercial buildings, mainly because I think those are the easiest to address. We know that many birds die from window collisions. Designing bird safety into buildings from the beginning can result in attractive and functional buildings which are much less deadly to birds. You spoke a little bit about some of the design choices. Some of them are minimal in cost. The American Birding Association has a whole bunch of different solutions, both from residential to commercial. I was able to very quickly in like an afternoon implement some of my windows and put that in place. I know that the birds will collide into windows. I used to have them collide a couple times a year, which is heartbreaking if you're sitting there. And I visited a building for work and I was walking through, they had this pedestrian walkway from one building to the next. It's all glass, and so it's all lit up at night. And I said to them, you know, do you try not to be weird at work? Ever have birds hit this? Oh yeah, all the time. Our staff has to go out every morning and pick up the carcasses of the birds that hit the windows at night because they're leaving the windows, the lights on overnight, drawing in the birds. And that certainly can be, you can mitigate some of that by knowing when is the season of heavy migration. And for those couple weeks in the spring, couple weeks in the fall, you're making sure that in town we turn off the lights. You mentioned high rises. Yeah, maybe today we don't have them. Housing element, I believe is going to change that. You're going to have more and more of that. You mentioned the ADAs right up against, we just had one go in. I went away Christmas, I came back, there's an ADU snug up against that lot line right by the fence. It was just shocking. You mentioned the safety, you know, please don't get distracted by the red herring of, oh, we need lights or safety. As your chair pointed out, many of the reports say that having lights is not the answer to safety and does not necessarily deter crime. You have the shadows, someone has to be looking, someone has to be willing to call the police, etc. Lights is not the answer. The other thing you mentioned about was the enforcement. You're really leaning on the neighbors. Okay, I get that. It's kind of weird, but you had in there in your proposal that you should be the adjacent neighbors. Who's going to speak for the birds? So if you have somebody with lights and their neighbors aren't really tuned into it, you know, you're busy raising your young family, you're going to work, you're going through daily life. You need to be able to have a remedy for the birds that someone else, even if they're not contiguous to that property, could raise the flag and say, hey, city, this is a light situation that can impact the health and the migratory patterns of the birds. You can't rely just on the neighbors. You have to be able to have others speak up as well. Thank you very much. I'm so encouraged by your work. I look forward to seeing more. Thank you.
Nice. Either way.
Wrestling for privilege.
Okay.
They didn't call my name.
We have two more, Gary and Jim. And I just want to remind you that you have 3 minutes. Appreciate it.
Good evening, Gary Hedden again. I've been a resident in Los Altos since 1975. One of the things that attracted me here was the rural charm. I loved actually that we don't have that many sidewalks that get out and enjoy walking down our streets, which don't have that many cars. I ride a bike all the time. It's actually pretty safe. I didn't really think about the dark skies too much when we bought our house, but I appreciate that too. And so thank you very much for that report. Very thorough. If I was on the commission, I'd be on your subcommittee. I'm looking forward to what you come up with. I think you've covered a lot of the ground. You need to look at the other ordinances and guidelines. We tend to be a pretty hang loose city, and we don't have a lot of rules. We try not to have too many rules and regulations and ordinances and fines and that sort of thing. So guidelines would be good. And then getting the word out is the educational part of it is important. Thank you.
Off the mask so you can hear me. I'm Jim Fenton. I about a 20-year resident of Los Altos. And when we moved here in 2004, one of the first things that we noticed was that it was really dark when outside. I mean, we moved from West San Jose, which, you know, not terribly much more congested, but it was much brighter there. And we got here and went, wow, look at the stars. So that's something that we enjoyed when we first got here. Now, you've really done your homework. Most of my prepared comments you've already covered. So I just have a couple of comments on things. One is that we do have some very rudimentary guidelines on lighting for commercial zone districts. It's kind of ironic that it's the residential areas that have absolutely no regulations in terms of lighting. You mentioned about ADUs and you know, more and closer to the line lighting because of that. I mean, I've seen examples of where people actually illuminate their fences from the inside and cause glare on the other sides as a result of that. So that's the sort of thing that we're up against as well. Our design review process right now, if I understand it correctly, doesn't involve any review of the lighting plans for the building or for the site. And that's something that I think is needed. I mean, I've looked at some of these plans, and it basically doesn't show any exterior fixtures on the drawings. Now that's an area that there might be some additional costs associated with making sure that the review process does cover that. And then finally, streetlights. When we went from the old streetlights to the LED lights, it seemed like the city got brighter just as a result of that. And at least the light on our street, it doesn't seem like it's at all focused. I don't think that it's going to be a huge expense to remediate that. I mean, it's basically a matter of you need some shields on the streetlights in order to make sure that they don't cause too much light trespass horizontally. You'd like them to be more focused down. So I think that needs to be done. There is some expense there, but it's not nearly as extensive for most of the city, at least, as would be if you were going to be replacing the lights entirely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. That was all the comments. I think, Tom. Yeah. So now do we open it up to questions, clarifications? Anyone?
I don't have a ton of questions. The only question I had is regarding enforcement. Trying to understand, from what you said, it's really a community enforcement issue, right? Seeing your neighbor, talking to the neighbor. And I don't know if that's the optimal way of doing it. That's something probably, we should look into that because yeah, I think it's very light enforcement. So I mean, either we do it correctly or, it's just like, how far do we go in terms with regards to the enforcement, understanding we don't necessarily want to have a light police, which is not the objective we want to have. So that was kind of a question / comment on the presentation, which by the way, was really good. I think it summarized very well all the issues. And I think if I can just add one more comment, I would say, with regards to light pollution, we're looking at 3 different issues, but they all link together, right? The first one is light pollution from non-commercial buildings and from commercial buildings. That's the big one we've been talking about, spending a lot of time actually already today. The second one is the bird issue, right? Bird safety. So which is also linked to the light pollution and what kind of lighting fixtures we have on residential homes, inside, outside, and at commercial buildings. And I think the third one, which I certainly would hope that we can take a look at, and you mentioned it in your presentation, is the city lights. And what I mean by the city lights, obviously, is the city buildings, but also the lights in the street, right? The lampposts. And we need to better understand, who is in charge of that, who owns it, who is responsible for that, because if we really want to implement some kind of a dark sky ordinance or light pollution ordinance, I think we need to look at the city lights, because it's a lot of potential light pollution. And I think we have all LEDs around the city. I've been going around the city at night, actually, and it seems to me like they're all LEDs. But I don't know what kind of Kelvin these LEDs are. If it's really bright white, so they might be higher than 2700 Kelvin. And then the second thing I think we should look at, not just the light bulbs that we have in the lampposts, but it's also maybe starting thinking about having smart light in the city. And that's an investment. And I don't know if that's an investment that the city can do. Probably not this year, maybe in the next, something that can be planned for the next few years. What I mean by smart lighting, being able to dim the lights in specific neighborhoods when needed during specific periods of the day or night, actually, in that case, which would reduce the cost to the city in terms of energy cost, would reduce the energy consumption, obviously, and actually would address some of the other issues we've been talking about today, which is the light pollution, maybe some safety issues also, depending on the neighborhood you're looking at. And that can be done, smart lights can be done using wireless Wi-Fi on the lamppost. And if you have that, you can add more things. Like in the climate action adaptation plan, we have one action in there, which is to set up or try to figure out how to set up an early air quality alert system. So on some lampposts, you could put potentially sensors, which would be linked to a central computer, like the lights, and you would be able to send out alerts to the residents of the city when there are air quality issues with some guidelines. So anyway, so that's just wanted to add that to the discussion, I think.
Yeah.
Because, that might be something we want to consider.
Yeah, so just in case I wasn't clear on the city lights, and I had meant to add this to the presentation actually today, but I didn't get a chance. But so a couple things. There's a couple components to city lights, right? It's the street lights, the park lights, and then the community center and downtown lights, which I think are run by the city. The city has a good feeling for community center, town hall, and the park lights. What they don't have a good feeling for, I think, I hope I'm not speaking out of term, but are the street lights, because each development was a hodgepodge. PG&E owns some, city owns some, PG&E controls some. They're all different types of light. They're not on a common, there's no common control of the lights. PG&E has been very difficult to work with, even for simple things such as putting up shields and other items. But I think the first issue is we don't have an inventory or really an understanding of what that agreement is. It's just kind of a historic artifact that we've been running it like that. So I do think that would be probably something the city would want to do anyway. As somebody was explaining, like, we know we have overlay maps of all these different things, of water, of sewage, but for some reason we don't have an overlay of streetlights. So we don't know where they are, who owns them, or who controls them. It's just kind of it seems like, again, a historic artifact that we run them on PG&E. So that's one point, but that sounds very complicated, and I think the first thing is get an inventory and figure out how we get them dark sky, and then we worry about the other things. Maybe that's a big lift, I think, it seems like. The other point is that there is a 200, and I think this is probably relevant now. There's a $200,000 grant for downtown lights that are being bought as we speak. They just bought a couple of them. And they were not aware of dark sky requirements. So I think it would be good to provide them, and maybe someone is, maybe the person I talked to didn't, I don't know. But I think it would be good to let them know what the guidelines are on the dark sky side. So what they purchase does comply. I mean, it would be a good first project by the city to make sure those are dark sky lights. And it seems like a simple thing and that they would love to do that. They were not aware of these requirements. At least, again, the person I spoke with. So that would be, I think an easy thing to do is for that first $200,000 worth of lights that they're going to do downtown. And those are, I think they're solar lights as well. So it would be good to provide those guidelines to that purchasing process. Kind of an easy one to do. Even before we do anything else. Did I hit all your questions?
Yeah, no, I absolutely, I think so. I just think that PG&E, and I don't know what the situation is with the city. I'm just, that's something to explore, I think. At the minimum, we need to talk to PG&E, find out what they're willing to do and what kind of an agreement we can have. Because PG&E is actually giving discounts or rebates for lampposts for city that want to change their normal light bulbs to LEDs. Right, it's at $70 to $100 per lamppost, per light bulb, whatever. So they have an interest in reducing the energy consumption in general. So they might be interested in looking at stuff like that, like like dimming the lights at certain times of the night and so on, which would reduce consumption, but reduce the cost to the city, obviously. So I think anyway, I mean, it just might be like a bigger endeavor, but I think when maybe we want to get started, even if it's not done at the same time as we do the rest of the other.
So one thing I'm gonna just jump in really quick is I agree and understand the interest of the street lamps. However, we're kind of always gonna be in control of something that's in the public realm. What we're not going to be in control of, though, is if we try to do everything all at once and then leave private property to continue to submit applications. I would say the ordinance as it affects and is applicable to private property should be the commission's priority because we receive applications daily, if not weekly, for the larger development like public comment even talked about on El Camino. So where I think, obviously as we have, with vetting ordinances back and forth between the commission and staff and everything, is if we can at least get an initial draft, so then staff can kind of chew on it, see what we have to do in order to finesse it. And then that might be, a month or a meeting essentially in between us then kind of coming back with something totally edited and have digested from internal purposes. The commission could then during that time be working on kind of some of the inventory or other discussions to kind of like somewhat segment the process. Because like I said, it's, street lamps, there's not a street lamp that is privately owned, in the city.
And just so I'm clear, so what you're saying is you would suggest work on residential and commercial lighting ordinance, worry about the streetlights separately.
Second, yeah,
Second.
because like you kind of have already said, just from reconciling even on discussion is, well, we don't have an inventory, so there's a delay, and we also don't have the money for it, so that's another delay. And then the other fun one is the Wi-Fi or cellular connectivity, which you have to use for the smart lights that you're talking about, which I think is a great one. We also know that we have the worst cell service in Silicon Valley right now. So, I mean, fundamentally, we're kind of up against multiple barriers with the street lamps in regards to the cumulative conversation for that. And, if we spend, say, 3-4 months on that conversation, we're talking about 3-4 months of several hundreds of units potentially in plan check. And once, just so you guys know, from the housing law compliance, which is what we see the most of, is anytime someone submits something, they're vested into the rules and regulations that are in effect at that time. So we can't apply anything. So it's going to be more advantageous for us to get some of the private property regulations in effect as soon as possible.
I agree, especially for the new constructions. I seem to see your slide you're suggesting, if we have the ordinance in place, obviously we have one more residential area, right? Everyone's backyard, front yard, have all the lights. Are we giving them, is it like 5 years?
I think we have to decide that.
We had to, yeah.
So for existing lights, I think what I've seen I think in the model ordinance and in Brisbane, and I believe in Portola Valley, and I believe in Cupertino, residences have 5 years to upgrade their lighting to dark, once you pass order to comply. Yeah, so there is a period, but everybody would have to come in or should come into compliance unless they have an exception within 5 years. And again, that's up for us to decide. But typically it's 5 years.
So I guess I would kind of focus most of my questions on process and priority. And I'm trying to remember exactly what the wording of what the council direction was, but you know, something to have the environmental commission look at it. So are we now at a point that we need to go back? Okay, here's our initial report. Are we proceeding with the idea that we're gonna develop some sort of or draft some sort of?
They keep me
ordinance?
honest, but I think the council direction was come up with an ordinance.
Just have looked at it. It's very open. Essentially, so. A motion to direct the environmental commission to research and draft a dark sky ordinance, potentially including bird safety. Now the one caveat, like I said, when I kind of introduced this to the commission is, and Tom kind of already talked about it, it's also what some of the jurisdictions have done is, bird safety kind of comes with some of its own like complexities as well. And the lighting component, so there's kind of like the window treatments and kind of effects that we can do, so. The Cupertino has it as two separate chapters in the same ordinance. So again, like if one, like I said, in your subcommittee, you find, hey, these are our, 5 principles that we want to enforce in the ordinance, we can do that. It doesn't need to be the cumulative effect, because even though they kind of aid each other in tandem, they are different components that we're going to look at in plan check.
So, I mean, I think you laid out the, main consideration and made a good case for why a dark sky certification is probably, beyond what we want to look at, but, all the elements of what what the subcommittee would be considering in developing, some sort of ordinance or guideline. I don't think we necessarily know that or need to decide that now. All of the points you did in presentation, I think are right on, and to me, it would be, okay, next step. Hopefully have somebody join me on the subcommittee to get to draft, whether it be guidelines or a proposed ordinance. I do think, for me, it's also a little bit of a priority issue, it's not something that we've had on our work plan in the past.
I added it today.
Okay, but yeah, so I worry a little bit about, both our capacity as a commission, but also city resources. That this is kind of now jumping the line a little bit. It's not been in something that's prioritized in the cap. It is direction from the council, I guess that just gets it to jump the line in and of itself. But to me, that would be a little bit of a question of if there are other things that we have had on our work plan for, a lot longer that have not been moving forward for lack of resources. And yet this is now gonna be put as priority, and maybe that's just the way it is, but I
No, I think that's a really good point. We can tee that up in the next agenda item. But I think, it's a perfect point, valid point. But I do think, I did add this to the work plan. I didn't put a priority on it yet because we haven't discussed it at all or anything, but it seems like the council wants to get this done. I do think when I think about the fact we have no lighting guidelines in the city, that's a big issue that we should try to cover. And maybe there's a sequence of steps we can do. I don't know if that's something we need to talk about on the subcommittee and then make a recommendation. I have no explicit recommendations tonight, other than let's take a vote whether we want to move forward. And I don't even know if we have to vote, but let's decide if we want to move forward, and hopefully at least one other person will want to join the committee, and then we can do with that subcommittee, we can put a work plan together and decide what we want to have done by when. But I don't think we're at a point where we can do any readout to the council. There's still more work that needs to be done. I don't think they were expecting a readout this quickly. I could be wrong, but
Yeah, I was just checking in to make sure if we continue to, you know, put time and effort into it, that it is something that's gonna be, that wants to move forward.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
no.
And I would, you know, err on the side of the, you know, the low hanging fruit approach at this point. Yes, get the new application, the new building applications, you know, capture those before they are installing, you know, bright lights that are really important things. Worrying about retrofitting may, you know, may take a little bit more thought, and then the next level up is, sounds like city lights being kind of the big behemoth that's gonna require more resources.
Makes sense.
Thank you for a very detailed report. I think I kind of agree with what Nick was suggesting in that, we focus on what we can get done in a short period of time based on what, and then laid out kind of like a plan to be. And the other thing is I'm also in agreement that I think even though there's similar in the things that get done, the dark skies or the light pollution versus the grid protection are different things. So I know if we're trying to get ahead of, you know, the design review, you know, the new buildings that will go ahead without one or the other. It may be simpler to separate them into two ordinances than to combine them because they're. Well, it depends how we want to do it, but if you're just focusing on light, that's one thing that's easy. Focusing on having things that people can do to have to do to change, you know, glazing and all that, that may be another thing. So those two things. I do share Laura's concern about how this ties in to our overall big picture. I mean, if our main goal is we follow along the cap and we things that are aligned with the cap, it doesn't necessarily, except maybe we could say we're helping the wildlife and the green community, something like that. But I do think that light pollution in itself can be considered an environmental issue. So and just a bunch of random comments, not any any specific question.
I agree.
But
Brain dump.
Right, yes, exactly. I'm just trying to, you know, figure out how
Yeah.
this fits in with everything, but,
It is important. I didn't quite look at tying it into the cap, but it does potentially save energy.
yeah, that too, yes.
And it does help wildlife, it helps human health.
Yeah.
So I think there's any number of ways you could do it, even though it's not explicitly called out. But I also, I do believe when we put together the plan, we had another area where we said unless otherwise, so this is our plan. These are the items unless the council directs us
Yes,
otherwise.
yes.
So I think that's a key marching order, I think. But yeah, it's not clear that it was a priority until last month.
But I think also in fairness, you know, we're going to present our work plan to the council hopefully next month.
Yeah.
So I think it's like, we missed it last year, we didn't have one. So we put together a work plan, you know, based on what we believed was the right thing to do without necessarily getting feedback from the council. So we're gonna get it in February, so I think we can sort that out at the
Maybe
time.
March,
Right?
but
But I
yeah.
think the dark sky ordinance obviously is becoming a priority, right? So the council is directing us to do it. I think it's becoming a priority. The question is, how do we juggle with the other priorities, right? And I think, you know, it's also it's more a staff issue, a staff resources issue than it is a environmental commission resources issue. I think with 7, if we have two members on the subcommittee for that, we still have plenty of other members that can work on other projects, I think. So I think that's.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah, I think just to add to that, just to clarify a little bit, I think that if, in my mind, the urgency would be to prevent new houses going up without, you know, the guidance that would come from such an ordinance. So like we did with the reach codes, the first set was targeted towards new buildings, and then, you know, next thing for remodels, all that stuff coming. So if we target something specifically for what happens with new buildings, and we don't have to worry about, you know, how we get people to, you know, change out or retrofit or all that stuff. We start with one thing that's simple and get it done quickly.
I agree with the direction that it's going, so I really don't have much to add. I think that establishing a subcommittee to work with staff to keep this moving forward is the appropriate approach and keep it focused on residential. If you want to put residential and commercial. I think the other thing is that regarding the street lighting, I think there is an opportunity maybe to, and I don't know what the funding is specifically or what's being developed under it, but maybe look at that towards, can we set a standard that maybe be able to be applied to other areas within the city as to the street lighting that's developed for this grant that's part of it. And that I don't think should be part of the commission. That's more or less just a suggestion for that project as you look at it and work on it.
Yeah, so just so the commission knows, the $200,000 that was provided by Senator Becker's office was essentially to get as much lighting in downtown Los Altos off the grid. That's gonna come with some potential limitations or implications in regards to, we have some trees that are gonna extend well above the street lamp itself because we have lower profile lamps in downtown. So if you can't get solar to actually essentially heat up the array, you're not gonna have enough juice that's gonna, you know, charge a battery that's attached to the lamp. So it's kind of a little bit that we're having to kind of test out one. We actually did test one that even though it didn't have an explicit shield, I can tell you that it was so low, like essentially voltage that, I mean, there would be no implications with dark sky because I mean, it barely lit anything because of the fixture that it was, where actually one of my staff was under it and I could barely see her from just across the street in front of the Wells Fargo building. So we are looking into the kind of what we can and what we can't do, because obviously we want to try to get us off to, you know, off the grid as much as possible, but you know, with buildings that will potentially cause shade and cast over, there's certain, so it's not, I will say, just so you guys all know, we didn't just place a $200,000 order last week. It's kind of like we just ordered one and then we sent it back because it's not going to work, and now we I think have 2 or 3 other ones that we're kind of playing with a little bit
So
to
you
see.
do a hybrid plant makes like not all are solar power.
Well,
But
so,
I do see a
yeah.
challenges.
yeah, so that's actually
Especially
what we're
winter
looking
time.
for. Yeah.
You know, those are the most needed things that we don't want, right? So,
Yeah.
So.
Well, so that's what we're looking for, is one that can either be the solar when it can power itself essentially, or flip on to, you know, essentially a backup power, but just a
That's
hard
right,
plumb.
back home.
So there's that component. We also though have to look at in regards to specifically like downtown in general is essentially our little microgrid that is downtown. The actual wiring in and of itself is not actually very strong. So we actually have certain things that are plumbed that actually are not getting enough juice to actually turn essentially the fixture on. So we do have that. The one thing I will say is the shielding thing with PG&E, when they own the lamppost itself, they are quite difficult, I will tell you. Is they can literally trigger it to say, oh no, then you have to replace the entire pole just to put a weird screening essentially of some sort, because they don't want the liability, because potentially how old the actual lamp post is itself. So there's a lot of weird nuances with those ones. So I do think, yes, we need the big inventory for sure, because I think that will help us in future years, regardless of any of this conversation about dark skies, just to know what we have to do. But yeah, just kind of tying it all together with some of the comments.
I think we just focus on the residential and commercial. And I think it's appropriate to move forward is what I would have.
I would just add to, yes, I agree. I think that's the first step. That's an important one. That's the one we want to get done and get back to council as quickly as possible. I think if we do commercial, non-commercial, I think we should add the light component of the bird safety. Not worry about the rest for the moment, but at least the light component of the bird safety should be taken into account in that particular ordinance. And then let's say as a second step or third step, there is all the lighting, the city lighting, and then maybe can take a look at other safety issues for bird, which might be something completely different actually, and with maybe a different ordinance from the, in that case, part of the new code or whatever. And I'm mostly concerned about the new multi-housing buildings that we're gonna have in Los Altos, and I think, you know, 2, 3-story building, 4-story building. I think in that case, in particular, it might be very important to have something.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think the bird safety element, I don't know if we should do it again, when I look at the components of bird safety, it's actually a lot simpler than dark sky light ordinances, a lot easier to understand. And like you said, with these higher rise developments coming in place, if they're putting glass balconies on for whatever, that's a big no-no.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an obvious thing I think we should discourage. So, and there's a number of obvious things you would discourage up front, especially with development such as that I think we could get them, would be acceptable, and aren't too complicated, I think, from a layman's perspective to get in place. So I don't know if we should delay some of the bird safe stuff or not, but anyhow, we can decide that on the subcommittee. Down for forward. All right, so I think, do we need to vote, Tyner, or can we just say it seems like the gist is keep moving forward?
I feel like I was hearing different things, but if. Nope, okay.
We're just continuing to subcommittee to work on this. We don't have a
Yeah.
proposed ordinance.
Yeah, like one more volunteer.
I volunteered to help at the last time, so but I'll step back if anybody else has an interest in this.
I'll participate.
Okay, excellent.
We can still have 3 people.
We can have 3, right? We can have up to 3, unless there's another subcommittee coming, then it gets complicated.
Well, there would be some more subcommittees, I'm sure. I don't feel it's so much just like.
There's 3 on, then 3 subcommittees, but there's only 2 commissioners.
Yeah, we can have one of 3 and 3 of 2s. No, 1 of 3 and 2 of 2s.
Why don't we keep it at 2 for now? And then Dawn, of course, we'll leverage you with your questions and other items. And we'll get forward that.
Yeah.
Makes sense? Excellent.
Okay, so you,
Okay.
Susan, yeah,
I'll-
shall pick and
I'll just
Justin.
talk.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, next item is, I believe it's the work item, all right?
No, it's commission.
Oh, commissions. Commission meetings. Good. Oh, this is the fact that a number of things were canceled due to conflicts and we were gonna try to.
So. Did everyone get a chance to review the meeting schedule?
I did.
Well, I kind of assumed that they were the regular days, but are some change?
Well, simply put, October, November are city holidays. So we,
Oh, I see down there.
So Nick and I were talking about this and we think that it's a good idea that in August we revisit rescheduling the ones that fall on the city holiday. Because there's a lot of variables that could happen from now, and I think there will be some commission member changes by then as well, so it would probably be most efficient to just wait until the August meeting to revisit those dates.
again, that gives us enough time then to, like, we're not gonna lose open dates right now. I guess the only thing I worry about is if there's some open dates now, we should just reserve them as meeting dates. Because I saw what happened the last time is I think we were 1 month or 2 months in front, and when they were, by the time we figured out there were no open dates that late in the that late in the year.
Well, so the issue is that when it ends up being, not the second Monday of the month, it's always, even if we talk about it tonight, it's still gonna be a special meeting. Because that's just the way that our norms and, the handbook and everything is all set up, and also the municipal code, so it's still not gonna necessarily guarantee us all this way in advance, and so if there is other commission things that are more of a, of a priority, that have to get agendized in, meeting space or whatever is the issue. That's just where we'd be able to revisit it, and we could do it as early as June, to bring it back so that we have a little bit more time, where we can have a discussion in June about the dates and then formalize them in August. I just think we're still, because we were playing with it a little bit the last, almost month. And we kind of saw some nuances of either staffing schedule or, just potential conflict of where I don't think we're gonna be able to guarantee the dates, because even though it says it's open, because we already kind of know of some like looming, kind of other items from other commissions that are gonna probably take precedent because of the time that they're gonna come in from completion of those projects. That's the issue.
Yeah, whether. Yeah, I guess it's hard to do, but if we just put down a date now, it's tentative. And that might stop other people from grabbing the resources. Because that would be the date we would want to have the meeting, like, we're not doing anything nefarious, we're just trying to grab a date and keep it. And then, of course, if something else comes up, you can tell us whenever it comes up that that's no longer the date. I think I'd rather put a tentative date down, even if it's, we know that there's a high risk of it moving, as opposed to not having any date down. It's better to get something on the calendar than not to have it, it's just my feeling. Again, I think we all know there's a risk that might move, but my preference would be to get it on if we can. And on the second time.
I think we need to put something on the calendar, because if we wait until later, as you mentioned, there may not be any dates, and that would be 3 months without meetings, which would be, I think would be an issue. So I would be in favor of trying to pencil down something now, rather than waiting. And then we can readjust. I mean, we can obviously later on, but
Do we know if there's other commission meetings on other Mondays, like the first Mondays? Or the third? The September meeting is on the 9th, and we go 4 weeks out.
October will be the 7th or the 21st, and November will be the 4th or the 19th. I think would be the 2 obvious dates, right?
If there's not anything blocking those right now.
Which one did you just say? Sorry for the first.
October would be the 7th or the 21st potentially.
Yeah.
We could do it tentative for the 21st, not the 7th, though. There's another commission.
Okay, so let's do,
Yeah.
we working with that.
Yeah,
Makes
having the
sense, right?
21st tentative, let's pencil it in,
November would be 18th.
or the 4th.
The 4th or the 19th, right?
Yeah, but then it would be
18th,
too
18th,
soon.
yeah.
The 4th would be just 2 weeks after the previous.
Yeah, probably the 18th, yeah, would be better.
I think
Also, because you don't have a December meeting.
we have no December meeting
yeah,
anyway, so.
yeah.
the
It could
18th
be
is a
actually
good idea.
one week later, it could be
It's Thanksgiving week.
the 25th. So it's, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Not good.
No, that would work.
That would work.
Yeah, is the 18th work in November, is that this open now?
All right, so. Good. 21st and 18th.
Are we good with that item? Yep. Okay, next one. State council planning, I believe Tanya came up with a A list for the year.
Yeah, so basically I just did what we said in the last meeting and set the list based on alphabetical order. And we had said that this would be the list, and then if anyone needs to or cannot make the meeting, then it would be up to them to get a replacement for that meeting.
Everybody okay with that?
Yeah, you just need to remove me from the latter half of the year, that's my term.
Oh, yes.
So, yeah, actually, that's a good point.
But
When do we
it's-
have to, when
Is the new?
the new term?
September.
Because it's September now, or is that?
Yeah, it's essentially stop starts September, so if you get reappointed or if you're termed out, then just depends.
So I'm not termed out on September 10 technically, but I need to be reappointed. That's the only question I have.
Me too.
And you too, yeah.
I think the only one then that we should know of, Lori, I guess, November.
Yeah.
Need a
Yeah.
Laura's replacement.
Laura's replacement on November 12th.
Yeah.
October 21 as well.
Well, I would just assume.
Oh, sorry,
we're
sorry,
in
I'm
place
thinking-
as table.
I'm thinking wrong.
Yeah, was it,
Wrong calendar in my head.
Yeah, but I think actually it's just the replacement,
Yeah.
replacement commissioner will take it. TBD.
Okay, so I'll update that and
Okay.
resend it out.
All right, moving along. Preparation for work plan and joint meeting.
So what is the date of, do we know yet?
Yeah, Nick, did you want to lead this
I,
topic?
yeah, I can kind of tee you guys up. And then. What's the date though? I don't have that down. for
We
that.
don't have to date yet.
Oh, okay, so well, it's either the first or the second one, so I think we'll have that affirmed then.
That's February, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yep. Yeah, so, yeah, so obviously the commission had kind of drafted, I believe with Bruno and Tom, right, you led the kind of initial
Yeah.
draft. And so, what I would suggest, for the commission to do is obviously we know, Dark Skies has been added to the kind of the list in the blanket, of what the commission is being tasked with, at this time. The single-use plastics, which has had some previous work. I think there's obviously a lot of good work that's been done in other jurisdictions recently, similarly to almost the Dark Skies where, you know, we don't have to reinvent the wheel and there's some best practices and things that we know work and outreach that we can kind of steal that we know. You know, the restaurant industry for thousands of other restaurants in another city has spoken. I think it's kind of almost consensus at some points for some of the nuances of stuff. And then there is a third one that I do actually want to bring up. And so I know I'm kind of not touching on the ones that are in order right now on your guys' list. But I'm gonna kind of steal Tanya's thunder. So the Urban Forest Master Plan grant that we did apply for, we did not get. We are not what is considered either a disadvantaged community or a community of need. It's gonna be one of our biggest issues for, just so you guys know, for any grants now in California. It's really kind of changed in the last, really actually very recently, in the last like 3-4 years, to kind of really kind of go to more of a segmented community of need, or what they also call is like affected population. And we just do not have that with today's demographics in the city and socioeconomic kind of groups. So with that being said, I do know that there is an appetite and somewhat of a thought that the council would like the commission to consider that. I can't obviously guarantee that, but I do think that that's something. I do know that there's commissioners obviously that also are interested in that. And so with that being said, I think kind of 3 big priorities that the commission can consider bringing forward, just jumping into a Dark Sky single-use plastics in the Urban Forest Master Plan. Obviously, I would say urban forest master plan is, if we were to do those in order, as proposed. The master plan is kind of the third because it's still gonna be somewhat funding dependent, but we're starting to go through budget season right now. So it's kind of perfect time to kind of put that back into the mix. Now, with that being said, I've obviously bounced around and there's things that are kind of at the 1, 2, and 3 level of the work plan. But as we've kind of talked internally and kind of, somewhat mentioned, is that there's certain components of like greening city operations that really the commission's not going to be able to do too much involved in. That was kind of a pretty good discussion that we had either a meeting or two ago. And then, the accelerating existing building electrification, for private residential, things of that nature, we're still kind of a little bit at a standstill with certain things other than just, trying to, encourage people, but regulatorily, with the decision for Berkeley still, the last option that they have with the commission, or some of you are not familiar, is they have their last stop legally is to appeal it to the Supreme Court. So the Ninth Circuit made a decision and is not going to hear the case. So with that being said, there's some of the things that I don't want us to try and keep on making certain things work when we have other things that are obviously priorities as well. But then Tanya, as well as sustainability as a division, is going to be kind of some of the gatekeepers of kind of coordinating and bringing together the people that are in various city departments to kind of talk about things. I'm going to use the first kind of sub bullet is fleet electrification planning. So for example, there would be, the need for us to have our city specific fleet plan, which is just period for any city vehicles. That's still been in the works and that needs to kind of be locked down and then added to with the electrification planning component of it. And facilities and maintenance is still working on that. But that's been actively going in the background, whether or not the commission's been aware of that or not. So it's kind of throwing all of it at once, but I kind of want to at least somewhat start the conversation so that we kind of know what you guys are wanting to try and move forward with, because the council is going to obviously have some of the ideas that, you're already all well aware of. But so that we can kind of formulate the very concise work plan to kind of get that, more kind of fleshed out.
So what I heard you say is you think the three priorities should be dark sky, single plastics, and urban forest.
Yes, and which obviously two of those are, explicitly in the CAB.
Yep.
So
Yeah, the urban forest and single plastics. Then with greening city operations, do we not have any funding for any of those activities right now?
No, I don't know about the SVC, it's free, right?
They're providing the planning.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we would need the next steps after that would be to take it to council and show them that we need to start planning.
Yeah,
to make-
Right, you need to have a
Get that.
schedule and you need to look at your fleet and which ones are going to come up for renewal and all that stuff and have a plan for that. And infrastructure also to load the cars and everything.
right, so they help you with the planning component, but so what you just said, the key term is we have to look at our fleet. We don't have a basic fleet plan today. Like, so when we say that, like we know that there's some, like my fleet for my department. Yeah, I have some Priuses and a few trucks. I don't even know what year some of those are because just unfortunately, predecessors and things of that nature didn't keep good record keeping of certain things. So we know we own them. We have some keys, but we really need to know kind of fundamentally what is going to be kind of a policy decision of the city is at what point do we then make the switch over and everything. So there's that kind of component. That's where I think, yes, SVC can kind of give us some of the fleet electrification planning component. But until then, we have the policy decision of when do we turn from gas to the electric is, yeah, we know what it's going to take to get us there. But so there's kind of some of those nuances. But yes, they can and will continue to help with the planning components, which, Tanya has talked with them regularly about.
I think the only thing I'm just want to understand is, if you look at the gap, we said 2030. all vehicles from the city are electric, right? That's in the cap. So in 2024, how do we get there? That's the question. So yeah, that's the only thing, and I understand. Obviously, there are several components, and you guys are working on it, which is fantastic. Is there a place for the EC to help you? I don't know. If there is none, we should remove it. It's just up to you to decide whether, that's something you want us to help you with, or, or just provide feedback, or just get a look at it, or it's, at the various moments of the development of the plan, or whatever.
So if you're, kind of like what I joke around about with council members is if you guys are gonna counsel me and you're gonna ask me for my opinion, I'm gonna say yes. I think it's something that should come off, just in full transparency. I think we're trying to make something work right this second that me and Tanya have talked about internally. It's just not right for the conversation today. As much as I wish it would be, because to be quite honest, there are obviously vehicles we would love to get, converted over. It's just not in the cards right now. I'll also tell you is, when it comes to even if we were to do an order for the specific type of vehicles that we're getting, we waited like close to 2 years for a Chevy Bolt that we have for the community center vehicle for their one car that they have over there. So there's also some of those nuances. So thankfully the supply chain and everything's getting better, but we need that fleet plan to be done, and it is going to be done this year. So, and then from there, I think we add on to the electrification planning component of this as well.
And just to clarify, the, your point is that the plan shows us how we can get to that 2030. It's just about how, taking that and how are we gonna fund that? And, what Nick was saying, what policy are we gonna, what policy is the city gonna go with? Based on burnout or
Yeah, so when do
the
you change
Prius
it?
are,
When do you change it out? Yeah.
the Prius are like 5 years old only.
I feel like we're getting into like
So,
a very detailed discussion on this one thing. I would say that, everything that I looked at, that it was, grant dependent funding. Or basically something staff is implementing. I was like, well, then it should be a priority.
It shouldn't be on the work plan, I
It
think.
should be, yeah, not priority. So I think we're kind of saying or being told that we have 3 priorities. I don't think, based on this and just not the readiness of it, fleet electrification. And even if it is a priority for the city, I don't think that it's a priority for where the commission can provide the most value. Even when the city is ready to do it. I think it's going to be mostly a staff in conjunction with help from SCC. So I want to that's the way I kind of looked at these things. Where can we as a commission provide, single-use plastics, something? Hopefully we could provide value in looking at the other municipal ordinances and research, doing some of that research and background like we are going to be doing with light pollution. So same thing with building energy audits. I'm not clear what we do as a commission that helps that along. And so that's kind of the lens I looked at it. I personally think that, I'm just kind of scattershot on some of the different things, but resilience hubs at some point needs to become a priority sooner rather than later. For the city, again, not sure that we as a commission I'm not sure what role we play in that without having funding, dedicated to it, but it is something the city needs to be able to provide for our residents. So, yeah, I think we are already pretty honed in on what the top they are. But there's a lot of wiggle room.
Did you have a comment, Jonathan? That's why you raised your hand.
I did, but I think you guys moved on. I'll after the meeting, I'll tell you.
I also just wanted to say, great job on this, and that was really well put together, whoever drafted it. And I liked the fact that you called out the need for a grant.
I have one observation that I may go through it. I agree with the priorities. But I also think that we may want to think about the potential role with the BACMed rulings coming up. There has to be a concerted effort to educate the public on what that means. And it really goes under this community outreach under building electrification. And right now, the item is just potential money for a consultant to assist with that. But there may be things that can be done independently of a consultant that to get the word out by simply passing along BACMed information that's coming out, because they're becoming very active in how they're going to promote and get the knowledge base raised with that come 2027, you're not going to be able to get a gas water heater. Come 2029, you're not going to be able to get a gas furnace. And I think that that's a drum that you're going to have to beat for a couple of years or longer. And so I think we have to be thinking forward about getting some sort of plan in place as to how to get that word out. It may not be something we start today or tomorrow but I think it's got to be started late this year or early next year. You got to have a plan on what you're going to do on that. Because or else, anytime somebody loses their water heater, especially the later dates, and says, well, I wasn't aware of this.
So are you suggesting, Don, that there's a fourth item, community outreach on?
Community outreach, it really goes with this 3A, 23A and 23B. And it really goes with C and D, because C and D is the building electrification, but it's really community outreach for education on it. And it goes with the BACMed, it goes with the incentives and so on. And we can't bite the whole thing, but we ought to be stepping into it, because it's just something that's going to take years to get the message out.
Right, so do you have a vision of what role we would play? The environmental, what explicit role we would play?
Well, that's up for question. I'm not saying there is, it may be just a coordination role, and maybe it's, again, it could be city working with other community organizations like Kiwanis, like Rotary, like Greentown or whatever, and have those community organizations getting the word out. So it's, and here you have to help me. I don't know how far or how involved the Environmental Commission should be in it. And I'm throwing it out here, but somebody's got to advance it. Because if we're here in 2026 and haven't done anything, it's gonna be a real problem.
So I would second your proposal to elevate that. And I think sometimes it can be as simple as when we agendize, whatever we want to call it, building electrification or implementation of BACMed rule, whatever every time we put it on our agenda, at least it's getting public exposure. What's the environmental commission talking about? That there's obviously, other ways, putting it on our webpage, providing other educational, we've done workshops in the past about electrification. We can do that again.
Or-
I won't be here.
But
What are you signing us up for?
so I guess what we're saying here is I don't know how how it's formulated, but if there's an organization around it, there may be a role for the Environmental Commission. There may be a role for community partners. And it could take all types of forms. We have information on our website, stuff like that, but we have to keep that message moving forward, because the dates are going to hit us and we're going to surprise our residents. I'd rather have the residents be aware that something's going to happen in the future, so that they can plan their building electrifying their residences. I'll give you an example, and maybe, I don't want to belabor this too much, but Half Moon Bay, no, it was Pacifica, went through and they had an environmental group in Pacifica asked the city staff for a dump of all the residents who applied for a hot water heater permit in the period of years. And then they developed a postcard and are sending postcards out to those people that have 5, 6, 8-year-old water heaters saying, here's, be thinking about this, you're gonna need a new water heater and here are potential incentives to help you change it out.
Or somebody who applies for a permit for a gas water heater. Did you know that in 3 years?
What I'm
you
But
can
what I'm saying is, I'm not trying, and I know this is, I'm not looking for, I guess, looking for a division on how different entities can assist with that communication. And it's a priority 1 in the cap. Building electrification was priority 1. And so how do we, even with limited funds, how can we advance that? And what I'm suggesting is some sort of outreach plan, if you will, and how people can assist.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, because we've been kind of having conversations and I've been talking to the building official, I think like data is a big thing in all of this.
Right.
And the BACMed regulations tie into 2.3A and 2.3B, which is to accelerate residential water heater replacements and residential HVAC replacements. And the CAP outlines ways to do that. It's just getting the data and working with, the building official and so that's where staff capacity, like we have to kind of choose
And-
what. And that's what I think we really need to do today is hone in on, like, because these are a lot of things that we're talking about here that require staff capacity, not just myself, but other staff in other departments.
So you're referring to the plan in general? The overall priorities we had in general, is it not just the specific suggestion, Dawn?
I'm just saying that particular project would be very time intensive, and I think it starts with data. And we don't have that data just readily available. We'd have to go through our systems and that's why there's or companies like was the company that we were talking to.
Yeah, the one that.
I'm saying even a step back further, even if you don't have the data, what can we do simplistically, keep it moving forward until you have the data or until you see what I mean, is step way back and say, what can we be doing now simplistically that's not going to tax our resources, that we can at least get the ball rolling on this and then add to it as the date approaches, as more data becomes available.
So just putting out messaging.
Yeah, maybe one of the thing is put out a webinar a few times a year.
I even think that's jumping ahead. That's part of the maybe part of the solution. I'm saying step back and say, how do we advance it overall?
I think he's using prepare our community for the upcoming phase out of gas, HVAC and water heating.
Yeah,
In doing that by providing education. And
Yeah.
that education can become more targeted over time. That if you want to, at some point, if we want to start to loop in the application process so that anybody who applies for a new water heater then gets automatically triggered to know, by the way, this is coming down the line that, yes, you're putting in a new gas water heater, but the next time you replace it, you're gonna have to switch over to electric, so know that, but you can start with just getting the word out, which is, I think, what you're saying
Yeah.
is publicizing to our community.
Just
This is,
start real basic. Start as basic as you can get, and then become more sophisticated and add to it as you have the ability to add to it. But I think all I'm saying is we should start some work, even if it's very limited.
I think I think it's a good point. I think community outreach is something the commission can help you with, Tanya. Obviously, if we're not sucking up a lot of your time in while we do that. But when I was, over the last month, I've kind of been benchmarking what other sustainability committees do, environmental commissions do. And community outreach is one of the items. So I think in general, that's not a bad thing to have on the work plan. And if we want to specify building electrification, I think it's a good idea. Obviously, without having any specific ideas of what we're going to do with that. But I guess a couple things. So I understand, this report, when Bruno mostly prepared it and I helped, it was really, these are the commission's priority. Understand that this is not necessarily funded or what staff wants us to work on, right? And that was, I
Well, I
still
think
think,
was worked with staff, so I think we had the discussion one, kind of back and forth and stuff at the time. If I may actually add to what Don was saying, I think, so what you guys are saying and what Don, Laura and others have said, if the piece that's grading city operation is something that the commission really doesn't have a role, there is no role for the commission and you guys are handling it and everything is fine, I think we should take it off the work plan. I mean, I think that's fine enough. I think the number 3 item there, to me, is actually the most important item on that work plan, which is accelerating existing building electrification. And it's even more important now because of the rich codes and the situation we face with the rich codes. We're losing basically 150 units, electrified units every year, right, that the rich codes are not implemented. So we've lost 150 already in 2024, we're losing another 150. And I think we should do everything we can to try to help people electrify their homes. And I think that's why I would just keep the whole, I mean, the 3A and 3B as a priority. And I think there are ways we can assist and there are ways we can do it at a minimum cost to the city. But I think that should be explored. I don't think we should discuss it today. I think this is something that will probably require a subcommittee to work on this and come up with a plan that can, be worked out with the staff and go to the council eventually. That's why I think it could be in there and should be presented to the council in February, unless you guys
So one thing
want to do something different.
I'm gonna offer is, so, because even in the commission, there's divergence. You love trees. That's that's like one of your wheelhouses, here specifically. Everyone kind of has kind of some of their kind of very, I think, specific kind of components of the cap and then just environmentalism and sustainability practices in general. In regards to kind of where we also kind of, I look at it like how we structure things with council is, it takes, a specific number of votes in order to get, even the council members to, get staff time dedicated to these things. I can tell you the 3 things that I listed, I know are council priorities. I also know are gonna have, kind of a specific amount of staff time, no matter how much help and support we get from the commission. There's still gonna be the background that staff has to kind of do some of the research or the vetting out or double checking, the work essentially, we might ask for assistance, but we're gonna have to play teacher and double check, the work that was done. So if we have things that are like these 3, that these are the things that require staff resources, I think that's palatable, and that also helps Tanya organize and understand that then these are the 3 things that she is going to be responsible for moving forward. I can tell you right now, even when Casey was here, having, let's say, 5 things of this level of priority with staff time is just too much. The things that end up, coming is more of a program management component where that's a fundamental difference, where even coordinators, managers, whatever it is, it ends up being really impactful. In bigger agencies, they're implementing multiple components of a cap because they have, a team of 10 or more. But I also do want to at least just acknowledge something though, because I think it's one of the things, because it's stuff that we know is kind of going on in the community and with other commissions, the goal one or focus area, is talking about, transportation and to fully implement, the CSMP. Well, that's not actually the Environmental Commission's, direct purview. That's something that the Complete Streets Commission is doing. I've actively been working on, integrating things into our code that create, 11B, which is the pedestrian, friendly downtown. The new parking management system, which also does VMT reduction, that's something that's already under study with our parking stuff. So we're actually doing a lot. I think honestly, we're not kind of saying and giving ourselves credit, for all of the other things that are irons in the fire going on. And one of the things though, that's really with Tanya, or just sustainability in general, is because the CAP and, kind of reporting and also, knowing what our narrative is even if Tanya, or the position, take the person out of the position and say, the position, what they're responsible of doing, they're still being essentially that master coordinator or point of contact, even for the internal processes, to kind of coordinate, to say, hey, I need you guys to work on this and you to work on this. So, there's all of those things. So I think if we're kind of getting to the point where, yes, there's the kind of outreach component, which is huge and wildly, I think, advantageous for the commission to assist with, on all of these various different things, where some of them are, even private funding related, like the electrification of buildings for, private homeowners. Really, the city's not going to ever really be able to kind of make, a major grant program, where we're saying, hey, here's, $2,000 for your induction cooktop, that's just not going to ever happen. But, how can the commission kind of strategize in a subcommittee format to say, how can we pump some of these things out that, whether or not it's an informational kind of, whatever it is, we're kind of talking about it, how Dawn was just, elaborating on. I think those are kind of some of those really good kind of components where then that allows Tanya to kind of spend between month to month on breaking down some of these very key components. Previously up until, just so the commission also knows how I've been trying to prioritize and focus staff time, especially after Casey's departure, is solid waste and all of the nuances to that has returned to the Public Works Department, because it is impactful of Tanya's time. And so there's a public works engineer that's going to have to spearhead that. She's still having to pass off some of those things because she was just doing it for the last year plus. But so we kind of, I think, in order to make the biggest, dent at some of the things, whether or not it was dark skies or whether or not it's the forest master plan, is having that really, keyed focused, that's how we can kind of get a lot done, is by kind of chipping away at it, with laser focused. And I mean, hey, the quicker that we can focus on those specific things, then we might add on, once it's done and it falls off the list, the tree ordinance technically was on the top of this list, really. And that's going back to the council in 2 weeks. So, the more we kind of laser focus, I think it's the quicker we can kind of turn them around.
So I second that, sorry.
And I just want to add to that, we also have the EV fair as well as the SVCE demonstration center grant that I'm also working on. And we need to finish that grant project by the end of this year as well, that we don't talk about or put in our work plan.
So I feel like, just to kind of tie some of that back together, I think that it's good for us to have 2 or 3 key priorities where we will be heavily focusing on getting a specific objective out, working with some, forming subcommittee, whatever it takes to get, have a specific goal. At the same time, I think that there are a lot of things in the CAP, and then there is again, as some of us are individually interested in, or some of us happen to know, whatever, I think it may be a good idea to have the big, items that are short limited, but then have maybe a cycling set of things that maybe we research or we talk about, or we do an outreach piece on that kind of helps us keep in touch with that. Like if it's outreaching a bill that's coming out, to kind of have those low level things that we can work on as a subcommittee of one, or just as an individual who does some work and reports that. I think that's it'd be beneficial for us to chip at all the big things that are in the cap. And then it'd be good for us to, update all around as to what we know of. And then also if the city's doing something, it'd be really good to, for us to know the city's already doing this, and we're like, okay, this is taken off. Maybe we focus our, individual research on something else.
Right.
So I wonder if there is a way to tie that in. Maybe we list it as community outreach or research or something that we keep doing and cycling things. Maybe every meeting we have one item that we talk
And
about.
I think that would
As
be
an
good to
information
be able to kind of structure it, because I mean, even sometimes when I'm talking with Tanya about some of the things in the past, year, and even though Aida isn't was the director at the time over sustainability, I was very much involved because of my background, educationally, professionally. And so, it does, like, when we have this many irons in the fire, I mean, unless we were a bigger agency, that, has specific dedicated people, but at the end of the day, even solid waste in our city, even though that's a key operational component of any municipality, there's not a full-time position to do just solid waste in the city, unless we literally try to do every single nuance in that discipline. And so, when it comes to certain components of even the cap, it's just, we're not big enough of an agency to only do that. But that's why I think that would be a really great approach, is to kind of, we have our ongoing 3 main topics, and then there's the kind of the ongoing kind of discussion point of what says, outreach on the specific topics. And if we really look at, honestly, a lot, I mean, I have the cap open right now, as I know a lot of you guys do when we're in these meetings, is, a lot of them are, they are really, I mean, it doesn't say outreach, but it talks about essentially, expanding, like the public knowledge and, information that's available to folks. So, that is one thing. I also do want to at least just touch on is, so when we do talk about like emergency management, we've already released an RFP for a very significant other planning document, which is the safety element update. And so there will be a third-party consultant that will carry the very big heavy lifting of that. And we're statutorily required to do it. So it's not going to be a thing for the commission to say, well, are we going to do it or fund it? We're doing it.
Are you talking about resilience upset?
Well, so they will
Part
be
of the
able to
resilience.
opine on specific components of, because I'm looking at the actual goal 7.2, and there's other components of focus area 7 that they will be able to integrate into the safety element, which then further supports what the cap has, as well as what we statutorily have to do. So some of these nuances, it's not that I just want to pull away from the commission, it's just, it's just duplicative efforts if we, have the commission and a consultant doing it at the same exact time.
I also just wanted to add as well is that with the BACMed regulations, since those are going to be, regulatory. I think if the commission wants to make the case that would, what, Commissioner Whedon was suggesting is a more priority than, for example, the dark skies, then that is up to the commission to make in the next meetings. So that is something to think about. But if this is a regulatory, in my opinion, something regulatory is trumps something that's not.
I guess what I was kind of thinking is that community outreach could be in parallel to all these items. And that Don's specific suggestion, I don't know if it was a suggestion or if that was a specific priority of yours.
All I was saying is building electrification is a key issue of the climate action plan. And we have to do things of community education to keep that moving forward. And I think you got the 3 priorities, but I think that that's a 4th on the community outreach that we should be putting effort into as we can. As time is available, or what we can do that's low hanging to move that communication forward in some manner, because it's going to become critical in a year or 2. And the more we can do now, the the less that crisis will be. I think the question really is now we've modified this somewhat and you have a presentation in February. And so I guess the question that I have is, how do we modify this to go forward to present it to the council?
Well, that's a good, I don't know the answer to that. I brought up to Tanya the last time we voted on this, this is what we approved. But obviously it's changed.
Before we move on to that, I just want to kind of address what you just said. I think what we're trying to do right now is to not have these like straggling projects that we're saying we're gonna work on when we can get to, because there's only one person. And I think what I'm trying to say is, like, when we prioritize it and put it on paper, we need to say, this is what we want to work on, and this is what we're gonna work on. So keeping the dark skies versus keeping the decarb or whatever, I think we need to like it, because other things are going to come up in the year as well. And again, it's not just those three priorities, there's other priorities as well. So if we want to make that a priority, then we should do it now.
Well,
That's what I'm trying to make clear.
no, I think, so a couple things. So we need to figure out how to get this to finality here pretty quickly. And so what I would suggest is, I think we're roughly in agreement. Those are the three priorities.
Which ones?
Sorry, well, good point. I'll just make them up later. Dark skies, single-use plastics, and urban forest. Those seem like three fairly big chunks, not that there's not something we can't do later. But I also do think there is community outreach that we should keep on a priority list. But I know Tanya's concerned about what we add to her plate by doing that. But I think what I would suggest is we only do community outreach when we discuss it here and it's approved by everybody, including yourself, that it makes sense to do. So I don't think Dawn is going to go off and start running crazy with community outreach unless we all on the regulatory items, unless we all agree and have a plan for it. So nothing's going to move forward without a plan and agreement with everybody here, or a majority of the votes here, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm just saying, if we want that to be a priority, then we should make it one. If we want decarbonization to be a priority versus dark skies or versus something else, that should be what we should decide. And because
Well, I mean, if that is open for discussion, I would prioritize, accelerate, electrification over dark skies. Working on that, if that is a choice we have as a commission. I am not clear that is a choice. So
I guess I don't understand. Yeah.
I would like to know if these are our priorities, just because this is either a combination of what's already in progress or what been told by the council, then let's just accept that and move on. There's no point in having a discussion if there's no choice there. If we're truly asking what does the commission prioritize, that's a different discussion. I'm not sure which one we're having, but.
I guess there are other questions.
Well, let's stay on this topic because I think this is important to finalize. Again, we do need to bring this to some finality pretty quickly. And so I guess I think there's three suggested priorities from staff. I think the commission roughly agrees, although we would, again, I'm kind of assuming a bunch of things here, but building electrification is important. I don't think it's clear what role we can play in that this coming year, but we want to help play a role and want to continue to move that forward. And so if I think about it, we can list these as all the top four priorities, understanding that I guess I don't know why we can't have 4 versus 3 priorities on the commission's.
And they
So
can,
I'm gonna interject because I think urban forest, yes, I know that that's been something we've talked about here and the council has recently kind of discussed it. But again, it's still somewhat a little bit budget dependent, which we might be essentially 2-3 months cart before the horse essentially, but it should still be on that, hey, this is gonna be the next thing that kind of comes up. But again, that's also fundamentally something that a lot of the heavy lifting comes from a consultant. So I mean, that can be essentially the fourth that we know that's teeing up and that's ready to go next. So once one of these three fall off, or not fall off, but just get to a point of, you know,
The
hey,
three being what? The three being.
the dark skies single use, and then I think you guys were talking about building electrification, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, and if, so in my director mind of how I have to leverage staff in a small agency is, you know, Lou and Heck just talked about and came to agreement that you guys would do dark skies together essentially. Not to told you, Dawn, but I mean, I know you've done work before on single use plastics. So I mean, if we want to re-unearth that to fully and like, let's get it to finality. I'm gonna also then further say is like, we don't need a robust presentation from the commissioners every single time, but I mean, what Tom did today, I think it totally organized the discussion of exactly how it, you know, what we were gonna talk about and moving forward with dark skies. If that's how we can get to these items, like when we have it, you know, agendized for, you know, the subsequent meetings after this, I think we'll be able to kind of keep these things as, okay, then Tanya's not having to kind of, you know, do the research and, you know, cumulatively know what's going to be done or not. And so we get that kind of robust discussion like we had tonight, essentially, and then we move forward, you know, subsequent with what's our action plan. So then I think, you know, essentially you're looking at then who's the subcommittee that's going to be then for electrification. And in the next meeting or two, they are going to come back with somewhat of a, hey, this is what we think our realistic action plan is to take this from, you know, inception to like this, let's get this going and, you know, steady on a treadmill, you know, going through the, you know, the course. That's how I see it in regards to, I mean, I'm a deliverables person too. So, you know, I know that's what you guys are all after as well. Like, let's see some progress on stuff. So, I mean, is that where I'm kind of hearing a little bit of that there's some interest of some people wanting to do like their little ad hoc or their subcommittee then where we have like the three delineated groups, like we kind of talked about at the beginning of this?
Well, I mean, I think I've been listening a little bit to what everybody's saying, but to me, the dark sky ordinance is a fact, right? The council directed us to do it. It should be on the work plan that's presented to the council in February. So, you know, what does it mean? So we're taking greening city operations off, obviously, because it seems like staff is taking care of it and we don't need to be involved with that. That leaves us with single-use plastics and accelerate existing building electrification, which I think are important priorities. And then the urban forest master plan, if there is an interest for the council, that's, you know, obviously that's something that they can decide. I think there is no rush on the urban forest master plan. We can wait another year or two. We don't need to do it this year. We can have an ordinance for the tree preservation guidelines and everything. So I think we're good for the moment, and I think we can push that back to, you know, next year, the year after. I would personally, in the context of the changes that have been made, specifically the light pollution or the dark sky ordinance, I would go with that. Single-use plastics and building electrification. That would be the priorities I would go for. Going to the meeting in February with the council, and then, you know, we'll discuss with the council and see what they want to do.
I think that makes a lot of sense, but I think it is a great idea if we can put names to and here's the subcommittees that are.
We can do that now, I think.
Yeah, no, let's throw some names down now and say these are.
No,
No, so you can't form subcommittees until you agendize it.
Got it.
For right. I think that you're having a very useful discussion right now, and an observation that I will make is if you believe that the council has directed the commission to work on something that should be a lower priority than another project, it's fair for you to bring that up to the council and say, hey, we understand the council has directed us to work on a dark skies ordinance. We've begun work on it. We have a subcommittee. However, because of limited resources, it means that we're not going to be able to take on another issue that we think might be more important. And we just want to confirm with council, do you share those same priorities? Should we move forward with something that you've directed us to do? Because you may not have considered that it means we're not going to be able to do something else that could be useful to the city. That is a fair point to bring up to the council.
and sort of let the council go back and forth. Oh, ultimately, the council will say, we want you to focus on these three things, if it is three things that you have the capacity to do. But it certainly is fair to say we received direction from council, but we think it may have been a little bit short-sighted, and this is why.
Just to add to what Bruno was saying, much as I love trees, I agree that I think the trees can be at the bottom. We should have the building electrification as, you know, one of our top 3 priorities. We can add another one again, if council directs us that we should work on something, prioritize that back up. But we keep things that, you know, below the waterline is things that we're not working on until one of the things at top gets done, off the table, and then we move something else off. I feel we should be, the transportation and building electrification are the 2 biggest things, so we should have one of those things on our top 3, yes.
And I think single-use plastics, I think from discussion we've had with staff before, it seems like they're taking care of it, and I don't think we necessarily need a subcommittee to work with you on that. Unless, you know, so that might not be something that's gonna take a lot of our time, that's what I'm saying, so we can focus on dark sky, we can focus on building electrification more than on single-use plastic, even though it might be a priority in general, because it's gonna come back to us eventually, I would guess before it goes to council, but it's not something that we're gonna be working on an ongoing basis as a subcommittee, that's what I'm guessing. So, you know, that's also something, you know, if that can help, I mean, that's the way I'm looking at it right now, based on what I've heard and some of the discussions we've had in the past. But I really believe that building electrification is something we really need to have in our work plan as a priority. I think it's very complicated to electrify your building now. I think a lot of what was promised by the federal government is not in place yet, but it's going to be hopefully in place by the second half of 2024. So it's the right time to do it, because there will be significant discounts, rebates that can be applied, but you need to understand the system. You need to be able to do it, and it's not easy to do it. Trust me, I've gone through that not long time ago, and I'm not starting from where the bottom. I've been working on
So
that
so
for
can I ask a
time.
question so seems like everybody's agreed with building electrification should be, or most of us are at least, but what is the work items in building electrification? If we have to describe that,
I think they're
exactly
right
what's on there.
I think there are 2 components of it, the way I'm looking at it, and you guys can have a different vision or see it differently, or different opinion, but one is we need to be able to help people electrify their building. When they need to change something, or something is breaking, or just before it breaks, we need to be able to help them get the right contractor, get the rebates, access to the rebates, the discounts, and help them with all these forms and requirements that they won't potentially be able to do by themselves unless they do a lot of research, spend a lot of time on it, and then even still not access all the potential discount and rebates. So there are ways to do it, and we've explored that at previous meetings before by asking companies to come and present what their services and what they can offer the city. And I think that's something that a subcommittee could be doing, is actually, do all that research, background work, and bring something kind of like a presentation to the environmental commission saying, this is how we can do it. Do we want to move forward with this? If we move forward with this, then, we work with staff and all that stuff to try to put in place the contracts of what it takes. So that's one component. It's helping people electrify their appliances. And the other component is the community outreach, the education, making people understand, have a way of making them understand what's at stake and what's available. And I think that can be done in different ways.
Can I just make a suggestion?
Sure.
Is that I think we're gonna have our next meeting before we're gonna go to council with the work plan. I think
Are you sure?
Yes, because we're not on the first meeting in February.
Right.
So
But
we'll have,
we're definitely not on the first meeting.
no, we're not on the first meeting.
So
So I think that if we can make this an agenda item to explore what building electrification could be in a meeting.
So we can draft a final, semi-final report with building electrification open, and we can flesh it out next meeting.
Yeah, I think you can draft something
Makes
that
sense.
we can vote on next meeting.
Okay.
Based on the discussions we've had today, I think. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, the real question is, do you want to add somewhere down, not as a priority, but the urban forest master plan so that it's in there? I don't know if it's necessary, but that's, that's something we could do. I think we've talked about, Nick has talked about the emergency management and resilience component. That may be something we take off if it's gonna be addressed by the safety plan. So we could take that off. I think the transportation piece there. I would potentially leave it in there, not as a priority, because we know it's gonna be quite dependent anyway, so it's very much depends on what we're gonna be able to access potentially. Yeah, so, and then, take Green City operations out. At the dark sky ordinance, that's part of the top.
Yeah, no, what I'll do is I'll draft a quick summary presentation, share it next meeting. We'll vote on it, make changes to it, and that'll be the one to go with.
So I think like kind of the sub kind of categories essentially that you must have is the way that I kind of been looking at it is kind of like how I have it structured with like the housing element implementation calendar that I just have in Excel essentially. Where, you have your immediate or what's going on right now, and then you have the upcoming one, and then you have the ongoing. Like the ongoing is the, EV fair, we're gonna have that annually, and the outreach and education, we already actually have that on the work plan. As an ongoing component, just as a reminder, but, I'm not gonna lie, it's a little intimidating to see 2 solid pages essentially where it's like, oh, whoa, what are we doing? Like, there's a lot. And so I think having it really refined to say dark skies single, and then, the electrification as essentially just 3 simple lines. And then how we structure that in the future with whoever's the little subgroups working on it. Then that's where we kind of peel back those layers when we bring those items each month to kind of discuss. And then we're able to kind of chip away at it pretty quickly.
Right?
For discussion.
This item is.
Nick already gave some of the staff updates, so. I just wanted to let everyone know that I attended the SVCE year-end meeting, along with Commissioner Whedon, and some highlights from that year-end meeting was that. The US ranked second in the world in gross heat pump sales in 2023, trailing Europe. Electric water heaters outpaced gas water heater shipments by almost 12%. And electric options remain higher demand than gas alternatives across the board, and heat pumps are the shining star. So we've been talking about all this, and there is some light at the end of the tunnel, and some good things are happening. So and there's a whole article that I'd be happy to share that, sheds more light on those points.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the data, would be.
Yeah, it's just an article
Yeah.
that, yeah, it
Love
was
to see
written
that.
by
Sure.
one of the
Thank you.
speakers, yeah. Another thing I wanted to put the word out was, SVCE has an education fund, and they're putting, $80,000 in grants. For elementary, middle, high school, and community college students. And they can each be awarded up to $10,000, so I just wanted to, and it's to address. How to reduce emissions and fight climate change, so if you know anyone and want to spread the word, I think the applications, due on the 18th. So,
Of
yes,
January.
of January. So,
SVC is very notorious for good,
Yeah,
very
they do.
short lead time.
Do they take that to the local high schools? Does anybody know?
I'm sure.
If you could send that to me, at least I know the people at Mountain View, I could.
And I've sent it in the past. I don't know if I can't remember if I sent it this time, but it came out in December, so.
yeah, it's,
Whole month.
so, yeah, they've been talking about it, so. Yeah, I can send like the details on it as well. And I'm not sure how like intensive the application is, so hopefully it's not too bad. But yeah, spread the word. And that's it. So far, that's the update.
Can you give us an update on the discussion around the tree protection ordinance at a council meeting? It's a nice detailed article in the that.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see that.
I wouldn't do that meeting.
So, yeah, so they wanted us to really kind of look at the fee structure, fundamentally and kind of, you know, bring that back just to see if there's any impediments, or, you know, something that would limit someone from actually wanting to take out a tree that needs to be taken out. That was really kind of a big component, off the top of my head. I'd have to honestly have the ordinance, back in front of me, right this second. Is still just clarifying it and fine tuning it, essentially. And then obviously to just the potential concern of, you know, the arborists and all those just fundamentals of, you know, the things that are just, you know, a significant change from how we've been doing things. So kind of just further kind of, you know, hopefully refining it, bringing it back.
And is there a second reading in 2 weeks? Or is it?
So it would be a reintroduction. Yeah.
So that would be a second read after that.
Yes.
Next item, commission reports. Were there any updates? Who were the people?
I had November and it wasn't particularly environmentally related. It was the shared police services and then most of it was taken up by the resident for Hamas, Israel, and then and Jose Allen. So yeah, but nothing particularly relevant for us.
Any others that anybody had?
Remember, we saw Jonathan get remotely introduced and welcomed as our new mayor.
The new mayor and the new vice mayor. When was this of the meeting?
Any others? No.
Don't know. I don't know
Okay.
if I had anything on an assignment. I didn't
November, December.
listen to anyone or join any meetings.
But yeah, it's
Was it 2 meetings? That was only one
11:14
meeting.
and 11:28. You attended 11:14.
Yeah, it was the 14th, yeah.
The 14th, so you attended the 20th. No. Okay.
Okay.
It was gone.
I can kind of just give you guys the quick rundown. There was an acceptance of a Mills Act contract, which is a historic property. There was some addendums to contracts. There was the second reading of the second component of the major housing element implementation ordinances, which did a lot of what we were required to do about a month ahead of time, which is great. That's also then when we did the first reading on the 28th of the tree protection ordinance. The shared police services, like Laura mentioned, and then a discussion around an outdoor patio project at the Civic Center Library. So that's what was on the 28th.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
The next topic is potential future agenda items. We have 4 that haven't really changed much in the last.
Yeah, I can make a comment on one of those. I think we can take the SDC tariff funding program off the list. Because it's not happening. They didn't get, I think they didn't get the financing from the state, so like I haven't really heard anything to the contrary right now, so I think we can take that off the list. And then Beachley, I met with them back last year, and I think at this stage, until they make further progress on some of their applications, software applications, specifically with regards to meter reading and understanding where the energy comes from. I don't think there is any real need for us to go with them. They have also stuff about EV charging, but it's less relevant, I think, to the commission. But I mean, we can keep it on there for the moment, but I think
No, I
it's
think,
not a relevant
I think it's
agenda
at the
item
stage.
anymore.
Yeah.
Yes. And then the 2 other ones, I know the parking management plan is something that's moving on. I think, I don't know, do you have
The
a
only thing that I
consultant
can,
already or?
yeah, the consultant,
Yeah.
they actually just did parking, counts, in December. So, we'll probably hear back from them with some just
Right.
data related stuff. But they really, I mean, it's still very early on, so.
Yeah.
We probably won't know much to kind of even just share, for at least probably 2, maybe 3 months.
Yeah.
Now I know you guys were asking something about the community cafe. That is something that I don't know who has, commission assignments to participate or watch the, council meeting. That might be something that we might be able to take up based on whatever is discussed, because that is, Jamie Chu, or Manny Hernandez will be doing, an item on that, in 2 weeks, I believe.
At the council.
Yeah, at the council meeting, so, because we don't have anything else, right this second to, share about that, but they might not need to have it as a standalone future agenda item if, depending on what they discuss, or who, I guess, listens in.
So actually, for the Bitchley one, can we keep it on for one more cycle? I think there were, if I remember right, there were applying for an RFP with SVCE
Yeah.
to see if we could get her data. I don't know what happened to it.
Well,
So,
nothing, I mean, I can get back in touch with them, but
Yeah.
I told them, once you get something concrete.
Yeah.
Get back in touch with me and then we can do something.
Yeah, why don't we keep them off until they get the data?
What,
yeah.
what, work plan?
it's
does
just
that-
another, it's 2 cycles to get back on, right?
What work plan item does that relate to?
It relates to
Electrification.
electrification, building audits, energy audits.
Because like, for example, in terms of building electrifications, what you would want to do is to potentially target specific homes that are less energy efficient, that have mostly gas. So they would be able to tell us, give us that target if they were able to access the data from the meters. And that's where it's interesting, because nobody really can really access.
But they don't have that data.
They don't have it right now. They need to have a contract in place either with PG&E or SDCE. They were working on that, so I haven't heard.
Yeah, so sometime late last year, they were applying for an RFP with SEC. I don't know.
When we can take it off the list.
I think
or
take
you-
off
bring it
this,
back
when,
on, I
when you
guess.
hear they have the data, then we
Yeah,
can bring it up.
I'll bring it up and
Yeah.
then we can put it back on.
Any other items anybody feels like we should add? Like One once, going twice?
I think we should have the work plan. I mean, I don't know if it should be.
No, that'll be on the
item,
next-
but
that's
it's
be on
gonna
the next
gonna be
agenda.
on the next.
That'll
one. So
be an
That's the,
Yeah.
that's the work we want.
Work
Not
plan
this
and then the discussion with, proposed discussion with council, take a large chunk of next.
Yeah, next meeting, yeah, most likely.
Okay, I guess that's it. Thanks for everybody's
Thank you.
time. Yeah, thank you.
Good job.